There's an estimated 50 to 60 million people that are diagnosed with anxiety and depression every year in this country. And 2/3 of them, and we know about 2/3 just based on claims data, 2/3 of them do not get it treated. I mean, think about that. Imagine if I give you that same stat about someone with cancer, of 10 million people a year have cancer and 2/3 of them don't get it treated. Like, that would be crazy. You would say, like, that's not possible. Why would anyone do that? We had this premise from the beginning of, why is mental health treated any differently than physical health? And then when you look at the data, that not only should it be treated the same, it literally is the same.
This is Undiluted, the show about the amazing founders and companies who've used government R&D grants, contracts, and sales to build their products, grow their companies, and keep their equity. We are Katie Person and Gene Kesselman from MIT and Jeff Orzer from FedScout. And on today's show, we talk with Chris Molaro, founder of NeuroFlow, about how his experiences with mental health in the Army, a chance encounter in business school, and federal funding led to a solution that's helping bring mental health care to millions.
I applied to 7 schools and it was the only one I got into, so it was a pretty easy decision. I got waitlisted at University of Texas. I found out later that I reviewed my essays afterwards and didn't proofread and left Wharton in my UT essay. So I'm proud I still got waitlisted. So that's pretty funny. I mean, I had a 2.8 undergrad GPA and under 700 GMAT. I was not your premier MBA candidate. I wasn't SF or a Ranger, like special ops guy. I founded a nonprofit when I was in the Army that raised close to $1 million supporting soldiers' education, gave them scholarships and stuff like that, which was pretty cool. It's called Things We Read. And I think that was like the thing that got me over the hump to get in. But moved to Philly. I'm from Long Island. My wife's family's from the Poconos, so we're semi-close to home. We're close enough to be convenient, but not so close where they could just drop in. Yeah, it's good to be home. I was able to go to undergrad for free at West Point. First person to graduate in college from my family. So we came from a background where college wasn't going to be an option unless I took out a bunch of debt or went to a community college or something, which, something stuck with me of wanting to go to a 4-year university and get out of my hometown and so forth. And so I was fortunate enough to get into West Point, and I don't come from a military family. So my dad was like, "You're doing so well in high school. What do you mean you want to go in the Army? But you have so many options." And I said, "Dad, look, let's talk about it. Do your research and let's come back to the table." And he did. And he goes, "I was wrong. This is amazing. You need to do this." And that was in 2006. I graduated in 2010 and I never looked back in the Army. There's hindsight's 2020. I look back at my platoon leader time, and I don't think there could have been better training to be a founder and entrepreneur than to be a leader of soldiers, especially when deployed. I mean, my company, NeuroFlow now, is just under 100 people. But a year ago, we were 40 people. We were the platoon-size element, operating with a finite budget, and we had to figure stuff out without people giving us directions. Like, what else is a platoon leader doing on patrol with no radio comms back to your fob, and you need to figure it out. So I think it really has been, from like a mission standpoint, developing our culture here, our values, asking people to lead with proposals, right? Like just everything in terms of, we have after action reviews at the company for when things work and don't work. And I owe a lot to, personally, my experience in the military to where the company is today. And now it's cool to get to go back and work with them from an innovation lens. So,
yeah, I have to ask, because my dad was very skeptical when I told him I was joining the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you think turned your dad around on West Point?
My dad loved history. He read a lot of history books for some reason. And I think it was that when he learned more about the history of West Point, when he looked at the list of graduates from West Point. Again, we don't come from a military family, so he was deathly afraid. And I was talking about applying to West Point in 2003 and 4. Iraq just kicked off. Afghanistan had been going on. So he was like deathly afraid of his only son going off and going to war, especially for someone that has never been exposed to that. But then he learned about there's other jobs in the Army that you can do that are not combat related. Now, joke's on him because I went field artillery and deployed overseas anyway, but that's neither here nor there.
So I was wondering if you could help, like, where did the inspiration for NeuroFlow come from?
So we, when I was an artillery officer, we deployed overseas to Iraq, and we were in the southern part of Iraq. We did not do an artillery mission at all. Based on the time when we were there, we were effectively an infantry platoon. We were doing route clearance, counter IDF or indirect fire on the base. So we were just patrolling, doing security and so forth. And in that world, over a course of a year, we had close to 300 combat patrols under our belt. You had every day you were on, 365, 24/7, no holidays. You're amped at this certain level where adrenaline is pumping and you can't turn it off for your own sake and for your buddy's sake to your left and your right. I got off easy. That was my first and only deployment. I had a number of soldiers that I get to call colleagues. They were on their 5th or 6th deployment, and they had families at home. I was single when I was deployed. I don't know how people deployed with families back home. I had no one to care about but myself, right? If I had a girlfriend or a spouse or kids, it would be an entirely different world. So I can't entirely empathize with what they were feeling and how they were going through, but I can empathize, and I tried to, when I was leading them, I tried to do that. Anyway, long story short, we came back home, fortunately with no loss of life, but some people had physical injuries and were seeking medical help for that. And as anyone that has deployed overseas knows, that when you come back home, they do a medical readiness assessment on you. Part of that assessment is mental health oriented. And fortunately, I had a soldier that identified as having sleep issues and depression. Now, I say fortunately because there's nothing wrong with identifying yourself as needing support. In fact, it's a good thing because then you could go get that support. So he was referred to a therapist and given medications and provided all the support. And our unit, a few months after being back home, our unit lost him to his battle with depression, and he took his own life. I remember the battalion, the brigade doing an investigation, and it turned out that he never actually followed up with his therapist appointment. He never filled his medications, and no one followed up with him to say, hey, how are things going? Are you improving? The physicians involved never did what we call measurement-based care to say, like, okay, you're moderate on the depression scale today. In a month, are you still moderate? Are you severe? Are you mild? That gap in care is a tragedy, and frankly, I think it's my biggest leadership failure to date. I guess when you look at that, you think, damn, if there was ever a time where we could have mitigated that risk and avoided it, it was a situation like that. So I wish that, Jeff, I could say that I woke up the next day and had this light bulb moment for NeuroFlow, but that would be too cool. That didn't happen. So it was years later at business school, I was in a healthcare class. It was a business of healthcare, and it was taught by a psychiatry professor, a neuroscience professor, and was learning about these different care models that existed out there, these different modalities that were coming out recently, and how technology could play a big part in it. And that's where I thought, like, wow, I almost had this out-of-body experience where I remember it was a jolt to the past, where I was remembering being at Fort Hood with my unit and thinking, I think this sort of thing in principle could have helped. I didn't really know what, like, more descriptive than that. And in that experience, I remember it was my first semester at business school. Adam, who's now my co-founder, was a bioengineering PhD. So he wasn't in the business, he wasn't getting his MBA, he was just happened to be in this class. We met each other. We could get more into that story, but that was the impetus for it. That was the inspiration.
That's wonderful. Do you remember having that light bulb?
Yeah, in that class, because part of the class was thinking about opportunities in healthcare. Now, at the same time, it's crazy how the universe works with bringing things together. So at the same time as that was going on, so I went to business school with the idea of not really knowing what I wanted to do. I thought entrepreneurship was a path I wanted to take. I also wasn't entirely sure if I could do it. And so I also recruited for consulting. I spent a summer at McKinsey, which was great. But my first semester, I thought I knew I wanted to do entrepreneurship, so I was like in exploratory mode. And University of Pennsylvania was hosting a startup competition. It was called the Y Prize competition. The premise of the competition was to take a technology that Penn had invented, create a business plan around it, and then you could win $10,000. So I'm in class, we have to think about gaps in healthcare, specifically mental health care. I'm remembering back to the days in the Army, and the Y Prize competition was using a brain functioning technology to detect depression. So I'm like, oh, this is it. We can use this technology to identify depression in people proactively to get them support. And that was the light bulb moment. Now, what's funny is Adam and I said, $10,000, let's submit a business plan to this Y Prize. We had a week till the deadline, so we pulled like an all-nighter for 5 nights. It was a blast doing it. And we didn't even make it past the first round. I think it was just like, we still have the submission, so it's funny to look back at it. And we just didn't know what we were doing. We threw something together in 5 days that we thought was really great, but it wasn't. But what we did learn in that experience was, one, we had a lot of fun doing it, and it was invigorating. 2 was, we thought there was a real opportunity to innovate in that area, and that there wasn't really a big company that was doing that. So what I think it demonstrated to us was there was a huge market opportunity with tons of people that struggle with this, not just the military, right? That's the other thing that became clear, was that these gaps in mental health were not unique to the Army, but there's tens of millions of people, civilians, every year that struggle. So it was a huge market opportunity that wasn't being addressed adequately, and who else better to do it than me, given my background and that I was here in this moment. And from that moment on, we committed to each other that we would continue going down this route until after my McKinsey internship. And then my second year of business school, I got the McKinsey offer. I told them what I was working on. I asked them to delay my start date a year so I could work on this. And I never went back because this started taking off. McKinsey was always very supportive of that, and I have a lot of friends still at the firm and consider myself lucky getting that summer experience. I learned a lot, but there's nothing else like starting your own company. It's just been, even the bad days here, and there's a lot of them, nothing ever seems to be easy. It's just like a rule of thumb. Don't ever think something's gonna be easy. And I think if you anchor yourself there, then you'll be better. Even those days, it's incredibly fun and invigorating and rewarding. I like to say this is my second platoon, which is, it's probably corny, but it's fun.
Oh, you're 100 people, you're coming up on company.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Uncharted territory for me. I don't know. This is new leadership challenges.
Absolutely. So I love this idea that even though you lost the business plan competition, you were so excited about it that you went forward. So what was so compelling that you kept with this idea?
Well, I think, one, I think it was just an ego thing. I hated losing any competition, and I'm not going to end my entrepreneur career 0-1. That doesn't sound like cool at all. No, we're not doing that. I think part of it was an ego thing, which you can argue there's right and wrong things. I'm sure a lot of our customers who are psychotherapists would say, that's not healthy. You don't want to do it for that reason. But, oh well, the truth is that was part of the reason. But from a business standpoint, you really did look at the market. There's an estimated 50 to 60 million people that are diagnosed with anxiety and depression every year in this country. And 2/3 of them, and we know about 2/3 just based on claims data, 2/3 of them do not get it treated. I mean, think about that. Imagine if I give you that same stat about someone with cancer, of 10 million people a year have cancer, and 2/3 of them don't get it treated. Like, that would be crazy. you would say like, that's not possible. Why would anyone do that? We had this premise from the beginning of why is mental health treated any differently than physical health? And then when you look at the data, that not only should it be treated the same, it literally is the same. So someone that has depression and diabetes, not only do they have two issues, but their diabetes is actually worse from an outcome standpoint along when they're comorbid with depression. And if you think about it, that makes sense. Someone that's depressed eats less healthy, works out less, takes care of themselves less. It exacerbates the issues with diabetes. And then when your diabetes gets worse, you have worse symptoms, you're more depressed. And so you get into this vicious cycle. That gap in care, I think, really became obvious to us of there's such an opportunity to bridge that. And it's tens of millions of people, so there's a big market opportunity remember I'm at business school, so I'm thinking that's where my head's at. And from a industry standpoint, none of the big players were addressing this. Mental health was one of the few specialties that had not been innovated in. Even to this day, people that don't use NeuroFlow are doing these things like assessments on paper and pen. Think about that. We have all these advancements in oncology, in diabetes, in primary care, in women's health, in men's health. Mental health is still done like it was 50 years ago. And so that was another reason. And then lastly, my personal experience, like looking back on that, I don't want to speak for Adam too much, but I know Adam has had personal ties with mental health with his family. And I think if every one of your listeners to this podcast really reflects and looks in the mirror, if not them themselves, they know somebody that struggled with mental health. And so it was just too personal to not keep going with it. So it was easy to look past that. To me, that failure is not even a failure. It was a great learning opportunity. 3 months later, we won the business plan competition, won $10,000, and then we went on a winning streak. We won $180,000 of free money for business plan competitions, not just at Wharton, but Philadelphia region, a few nationally. It was awesome. That's how we funded the company originally. So
that's amazing. How many business plan competitions did you enter?
I don't know offhand. Like figure on average, they were about $10,000 a piece in winning. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure we maybe were batting like 900 after that. We went 9 for 10 or whatever. And I don't really think that was on me particularly or Adam particularly. I think that we were just able to put together a story that made sense based on the things that I spoke about earlier. The market size, no one was addressing it, those things. And I think fortunately for us, the light bulb moment started going on for the rest of the world. Sometimes they say it's better to be lucky than it is good. If we started 5 years earlier, I think we would have been too early. Policies didn't change yet. They didn't have mental health parity laws yet. There wasn't reimbursement codes. People weren't talking about it. Today, we would have been too late starting this, right? These things have been, especially with COVID, people talk about mental health more than ever. So in that 1.5-year time frame that we were doing those competitions, we learned a lot. We built a small team. Employee number 1, Sam DeLucia, is still at the company today. Like, he's crazy. He joined us like when we were literally a PowerPoint slide. It's pretty cool.
That's amazing. So you've talked about the business plan. Can you share a little bit about what NeuroFlow does? We've talked a little bit about the market. Like, what is NeuroFlow?
What we did back then and what we do today is slightly different. We made a pivot, but I like to say we're not a behavioral health company. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of behavioral health services companies out there. There's a lot of telehealth companies, teletherapy. There's a lot of apps that have like treatment modalities on them. And those are behavioral health companies. And there are some really great companies out there, a lot of which we partner with and we work with. I like to say that we're a behavioral health integration company. And what I mean by that is we are a software company that works with non-behavioral health settings like primary care, pain management, oncology, OBGYN, on helping those clinics integrate mental health assessments, identification, and care management in their settings. So basically, think about this. You go to a primary care doctor, They screen you for mental health, paper and pen usually. Let's say you score moderate on depression. If Jeff, look, like you're here for your annual wellness checkup, but you scored positive on your mental health scale, I'm going to write you a 2-week prescription and then send you to a psychiatrist. That's what happens today. Then you leave and there's no follow-up. They don't know if you went to your psychiatrist. They don't know if you took your antidepressants. They don't know if you're feeling better or worse, right? Any of that. That's the standard of care today. One, everybody that scores positive on depression doesn't necessarily need medication. Medication might be appropriate for some people, but for a vast majority of people, therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, just doing mindfulness, self-service sort of things is fine. But if you send everybody to a psychiatrist, you're giving people medications that maybe they don't need, that come with side effects that might make other things worse, and you're creating a bottleneck with psychiatrists, which we already have a shortage of, and that's why people have long wait times, they can't get into places. And so with NeuroFlow, rather than doing that assessment in paper and pen, you'll do that assessment and a few other things in NeuroFlow. We have an app, web-based and tablet. We assess the population, and based on that assessment, we triage them, just like you would in the military. So we say, this person's high risk, moderate risk, low risk. And then we provide that to the physician and their staff as a clinical decision support recommendation. We'll say, based on this person, they scored positive on depression. They don't need to go see a psychiatrist, though. They probably just need a self-service tool. This person probably should go see a therapist versus this person is acute right now, possible suicide ideation. So we have algorithms that pick up suicide ideations. And we'll flag those accounts to the physician's office. Once that person leaves the doctor's office, the technology follows up with that patient to do a weekly check-in with them. Hey, how are you doing? We'll do more assessments on them so we could track outcomes over time. If you notice, everything that we're doing is we're trying to fill in the gaps that otherwise didn't exist without technology. So we're extending the reach of the physicians, we're extending the reach of the care managers, meeting people where they're at, making sure that we get them the right level of care. We do that today with 14 million users on the platform, with a number of partners have lowered the emergency room department visit by 34%, because people feel like they're supported. They don't have to just go to the emergency room as like a knee-jerk reaction. They're like, you know what, let me do my exercises. We've lowered the total cost of care for patients, and we've improved the way that they feel. It makes the hair on my neck stand up when we read reviews from patients saying like, this app has changed my life, or I finally feel supported. We create habits for people, good habits, where every day I go in and journal. It's humbling to see that. I'm a big believer that technology isn't the panacea. It's not a silver bullet, especially in healthcare and mental health. NeuroFlow's mission isn't seeking to replace therapists or replace doctors. There's a significant place for them in the continuum of care. What we think technology can do is help augment them to make them more efficient, to reach the right patients at the right time, and to be supportive to patients where they're at. So basically, to use a military lingo, we think technology can be a force multiplier in mental health and help bridge that gap, which I think we're starting to show that, which is cool.
With 14 million users, it seems like there's a lot of proof in that, that number alone. So one thing that is really intriguing to me is you're dealing with such a personal issue, and mental health is still very personal. Mm-hmm. But you're delivering it through technology, and I've tried to get into like meditation apps many times. I never stick with it. Yeah. I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on why people are sticking with NeuroFlow?
Yeah, I think so. First, when you go to a doctor's office and they ask you, we've all been there where they ask those questions like, how many drinks of alcohol do you have a night? Or are you feeling down and depressed? I'm guilty of not answering those honestly because of the stigma associated with it. I don't want to tell the nurse, And so there's kind of two factors there. One, it's the stigma, and two, depression, anxiety, substance use doesn't happen just on the day that I'm visiting my doctor. And so providing technology to them and meeting them where they're at, whether that's at home or work, where they feel most comfortable, and doing that more frequently, you have a better chance of identifying those issues, and you have a better chance of them answering honestly because they feel comfortable in that setting. What we do is use AI algorithms to provide curated, personalized content and resources to the individuals. So if you and I were both on NeuroFlow and I was scoring positive on anxiety scales and you were scoring positive on depression scales, and there was somebody that was scoring neither, I would get content and exercises relevant for someone with anxiety. You would get content for depression, and the other user would get positive psychology, resiliency-oriented content. So it becomes more relevant for you. And when it's more relevant for you, you have a better chance of staying engaged. The last thing that we do, which is I think the coolest part, is we've gamified the system. So not only do you get like reminders to go and do your meditations, you get points and badges and stuff that can be redeemed for gift cards in a marketplace that we have on the app. I use the app every day, and I've earned Home Depot gift cards. Great. I needed a new appliance or something. Go in, $10 gift card, which is pretty cool.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Making something to look forward to, not seen as a chore.
Exactly. I think about going to the gym. It's been proven that if you go to the gym, you're going to be stronger. But not everyone goes. So how can we incentivize people to go to the gym, take care of themselves? This is like a mental health workout, if you will.
I'm always delighted by pivot stories. So I think that it's so interesting to hear these evolutions of ideas. So you said there was a bit of a pivot between where you started and where you are. Can you share a little bit about where you started and what caused you to get to where you are?
Sure. So going back to the pen technology that we were using, which was this technology that analyzed brain imagery to reveal patterns. That's where the name NeuroFlow first came from, was looking at the brain, neuro, and then patterns, flow, like blood patterns. And we used EEG technology to do that, and heart rate monitoring. So we used these biometric measures to measure anxiety, stress, and depression in individuals. It turned out that it worked really well. We have published research on it. I mean, it's really cool. If I was sitting there using the app in a meditative state, you would see my stress level go down. In 2017, right before graduation, one of the business plan competitions we won was South by Southwest, the big tech conference. It was awesome. It was 1,200 people in the audience. And at this point, we just had a beta prototype of the product. We'd never done a live demo. I had this brilliant idea of let me go on stage and do a live demo where I can wear the heart rate monitor and the EEG headset, and I can show my stress score in real time. We had never done that, let alone doing it live on audience in front of 1,200 people. But I felt go big or go home. Let's do this. We had one engineer at the time. So it was me, Adam, and the one computer engineer. And I'm like, what % chance is that this doesn't work? And he said, it's like 50-50 right now. I'm like, okay, could you get that to like a 70% chance of working? All night he worked on it. The next morning, I'm like, what do you think? And I'm like, I'm leaving it up to you. You tell me. And he's F it. Let's do it. So I'm like, all right, cool. So go on stage, introduce myself, go through the pitch. And I say, and if you go to neuroflowlive.com right now, you could see my stress score streaming in real time. And also we get like this amount of hits, and they showed it on the big screen, and you could see the spike of stress and anxiety coming over me. And it was just a really cool moment. And it was like, wow, this works. At least in theory. We haven't scaled up or anything.